In today's video, we're going to talk about something called Autopatch and Hotpatch and how they apply to Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktop. So if you don't know what they are, Autopatch is something which will manage your update rings automatically, and Hotpatch is something which you can enable to basically enable you to install security updates without having to reboot your workstation. So imagine those users who get annoyed by having to reboot their workstations. Gone. So Microsoft are going to enforce Hotpatch updates as of the 1st of May. So what we're going to go through today, we're going to show you how to enable Hotpatch and Autopatch for Azure Virtual Desktop and Windows 365. And then we're going to go through some gotchas and just explain how the technology works. So if you're intrigued about these two technologies, then stick around because you're going to love today's video. And if you're new to this channel, then welcome. This is the Virtual Mac YouTube channel. And then on this channel, we review the latest news on Azure Virtual Desktop, Nerdio, Intune, Windows 365, anything related to modern workplace. So if that's the type of content that you do, then please click that subscribe button because it really helps me grow the channel. And also, we recently launched a modern workplace school community. So if you want to be more interactive, then please give that a join as well. I've just put a link to that in the comments as well. Hope to see you there. All right, so let's first look at the requirements for Autopatch, and then we'll look at requirements for Hotpatch. So Autopatch, most of you will be already licensed to use Autopatch. Okay. Now, there is one big thing. So for Autopatch, it's not supported on multi-session. Okay, so what does that mean for AVD and Windows 365? So for Azure Virtual Desktop, that means Autopatch is only supported for Azure Virtual Desktop single session. Okay, and for Windows 365, it will mean that you're only supported on Windows 365 Enterprise or Windows 365 Enterprise Frontline full desktop sessions, right? Because obviously this is a per user licensing thing. It's not like machine-based licensing. We have to check whether the user is actually licensed to use it or not. So I presume that's the reason why it's not supported. Now, for multi-session, it would have been actually quite perfect because it means that you don't have to reboot the session host. But unfortunately, multi-session is not covered for Autopatch. It won't work, right? So that's the main thing to think about. But for those people who are running like Windows 365 single session workloads or Azure Virtual Desktop single session workloads, then you are covered to run Autopatch. So now we'll look at the requirements for Hotpatch. So for Hotpatch, we're a bit more strict because obviously we need to apply the patches without rebooting. So the first requirement is that you need to be minimum Windows 11 24H2, right? So if you're not at that level, then the first thing that you need to do is to make sure that you upgrade to that at least minimum version, which most of you should be doing anyway. The second hard requirement is that you need to enable something virtualization-based security. So what we'll do later in the video, we'll show you how to check that. And if you're not enabled, we'll show you how to enable it as well. So as long as you meet those two minimum requirements, as in you've got like E3 or E5 licenses, and also you have Windows 11 24H2, and also you've got virtualization-based security enabled, then we should be in a good position to enable Autopatch and Hotpatch. And as I mentioned before, the advantage that you're going to get with this is you're going to have the advantage of you will able to install security updates without having to reboot your workstations. Now, I'm not saying that this means that you can keep your workstations running for like constantly without months of reboot, because definitely would not advise that. But for me, what this feature is fixing is that annoying window, right? When you're having to get patched and you know how you do it, you click ignore, and before you know it, you're forced to do a reboot when you're right in the middle of working on a very important document. Okay, so for me, this is the problem that this is fixing. It will enable us to install the security updates without having to reboot the workstations, right? So that's going to make you a lot happier because it enables you to push out your security updates a lot quicker. It also means that we're going to make the user a lot happier as well, right? Because we won't be forcing them to reboot to get those security updates. So that's enough of the theory. So let's now go and have a look in the portal and see how we actually enable these features. Okay, so what we'll do now, we'll go over into the Intune portal and we'll actually enable the Autopatch, right? So let's go and do that now. Right, so I'm in my Intune portal. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to go and look at the tenant level, right? Because this is a tenant level thing that we need to enable. So if I go over to tenant administration, and then if I go down to Autopatch, okay, so if I just click down here, and then what we'll see is we'll see Autopatch groups, messages, and tenant management. Okay, so first of all, we need to make sure that we have some groups, right? So basically, a group is a way how you manage what levels of auto patch that you want to do, right? So historically with update rings, you've pushed out maybe some patches to 1% of devices, then 10% of devices, and then to 50% of devices. We can do essentially the same thing here using groups. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to set up some Enter ID groups to put your devices into. Now, you can put those devices in by dynamic groups, or you can manage them manually. It's up to you. I've already got some set up previously, but I'll go through and just show you what the setup process is like. So I can come into here and I can hit create. So I can basically go into here and say auto patch group for maybe cloud PCs, right? So you can split this up by like sales, marketing, whatever you wanted to do as well. So next, deployment rings. So I can go in here and see what deployment rings do I want to use, right? So by default, there's 2, test and last, right? But you can add additional deployment rings if you wanted to as well. So for example, if I go to a deployment ring there, it says it needs to be assigned to a group, and you can see that it's got a percentage level as well, right? So you could do 10%, then 25%, 50, and then 100%, for example. Okay, so here's where you put the groups. For example, I can put here, so tests. So these are going to be my test devices. You can see these ones are grayed out because I'm already using them, right, as part of my previous one. But I can put any random group that I wanted to within there. So if I've got like Autopilot Windows 365 devices, I can just put them in there, for example. So this is how you'd set up your different deployment rings. So I'm just going to delete those ones there. Okay. Cool. All right. Now, once we've got those, we've got the update types. So we can select what type of updates that we want to put in there. So whether they're feature updates, driver updates, Microsoft 365 updates, or Azure updates, we can manage all these types of updates by Autopatch. Okay. So next we go to deployment settings. So these are the feature updates that you want to push out to those devices as well. So obviously, I want my target version to be Windows 11 25 H2. So if you weren't ready to go to Windows 11 25 H2, we can just select a 24 H2 if we wanted to, but ideally we want to be going over to 25 H2 as the latest one. Approval method. So are you happy to put this completely on autopilot and let it automatically manage those rings for you and approve all those deployment updates to there? And then if you wanted to, just set automatically approve. If you wanted to do manual intervention, and then you select manual review and improve. Okay, but I'm quite happy just to select automatically approve now, and that means anytime a new security update comes out, or maybe 26H1 gets released, we can automatically push out to those devices as well. And then here's the different channels that we've got that we saw. So we can do beta and we can do stable. So if you're happy to use beta builds and stuff, we could do that, or you could just stick to stable if you want your different sort of test and last groups to be using stable builds. But again, I'm quite happy to use beta to get the latest and greatest. Okay, so next we have release schedules. So this is basically how often or when we want the deployment to start from. Okay, so this is basically going to say, right, okay, client update reversals. So we don't want to refer, we don't want to defer. So we can just say 0 days, and we can set a deadline on that, right? And then we can set those grace periods in there as well. Again, happy to leave these as default settings, what they're at. Okay, and then scope tags. So if you're using scope tags to manage your environments, then sort of deployment rings and stuff, you can set those in there as well. And then we just click review and create. So that's essentially how you create the auto patch groups. Okay, so it only takes a few minutes to set up, but the key thing is getting the groups, figuring out what to put in those groups. Now, one popular thing which you can do, so let's go back to the group, is for if you wanted to set up, apply, for example, a dynamic group, which is definitely something you recommend. So if I click add group to ring, within there, you just select the group. But if you go into groups and you wanted to set up, say, a dynamic group that only has Windows 365 devices in, for example, what you can do, if I go into here, you can set up a dynamic group, which will say only pick up my devices with Windows 365. So if I go to groups within here, and click on new group and see that membership type is assigned, I can put dynamic user or dynamic device. Okay, so click dynamic device. I can set that security group, then I can select like autopilot. So lazy patch Windows 365, right? And then I can add a dynamic query. So this query can build up how you identify that device, right? So I'm going to choose a property. I'm going to put the display name, and I'm going to choose an operator, and I'm going to put begins with, so starts with, and then I can add CPC. Okay, so anything beginning with CPC, which is the default naming convention for Windows 365 devices, I can put that in here. And then if we click on rule validation, that starts with CPC. So if I just pick a couple of my devices, for example, from within here, let's select, and you can see there it puts data. So yes, so I know that if I wanted to push out Autopatch configuration settings for those devices, I can just use that group. So just click save, and I can put that there. Click create, and then I can then go back into my Autopatch group, for example. I go to Autopatch group within here, go in here, recruit distribution, none. So I can go and select my distribution ring, and I can select edit, and then I'm going to change that actually to Autopatch Windows 365. Okay, Autopatch test group, and then select. So that's basically just enabled me to go in and update that group. So all my Windows 365 devices now automatically going to be put into that Autopatch group. Okay, they'll just picked up be automatically. So it takes minutes to set up. It's very easy to set up and configure, as you can see. And then once you've enabled that, it does a sync like every 8 hours or so. So it may take a bit of time to get that set up and running. But you can see here's one that I had earlier, and that's automatically patched it. Selected that into Autopatch group latest, and that's checked in earlier this time. So that's how we enable Autopatch. Now let's have a look and see how we configure Hotpatch. Okay, so what we'll do now is we'll go and enable Hotpatch. So what we've basically just done, we've enabled Autopatch. So that means that the update rings are going to be automatically managed by Microsoft for me. So I don't need to do anything. So obviously previously with update rings, you had to go in and start managing them. We don't need to do that anymore. So Autopatch automatically takes care of all that for you, right? So you don't need to worry, let it go. Now, to enable the Hotpatch, we need to actually go in and enable quality updates, because that's what the Hotpatch needs. So what we'll do, we'll go over into the Intune portal, and then we'll go and configure that for those cloud PCs that we just configured. Same process for Azure Virtual Desktop, single session desktops as well. And as I mentioned, multi-session desktops are not supported in this scenario. Right, so what we can do is I'm over in the Intune portal, and then I'm going to go to devices, and then I'm going to go to Windows Update. Okay, so once I'm in Windows Updates, I can then go to Quality Updates. Right, so I need to set the Quality Updates. So if I just click Quality Updates, now here's one that I did earlier, just while I was testing this, just to make sure that everything is working. And you can see here it says Hotpatch enabled. So that means that this is now enabled for Hotpatch. So any devices which fit into this criteria will get these security updates, will get deployed via Hotpatch. Okay, so I'm just going to go and click create, and then I'm going to go and create Windows Quality Update Policy. Okay, so put that there. So I'll call this Cloud PC Updates, for example. Updates. Let's click next. Settings. So this is the setting which you need to allow. So you can see there, when available, apply without restarting the device. Hotpatch. Okay, so we need to make sure that's enabled, and also apply the latest Unity quality updates for security. We need to make sure that's enabled as well. So I'm going to click next, and then we're basically going to set the groups in here as well. So included groups, so I'm going to add the groups, and we can use that dynamic group that we created earlier. Okay, so that was the Autopatch Windows 365 group. So I'm going to select that. Okay, so you can see there, that's got 3 devices within there as well. Go next, I'm going to click next, and that's basically, again, that's all we have to do to create that. So that's now created. So there you go. So it'll take a bit of time for those settings to come through, but that's essentially all we need to do. Right. So what's the setting was actually changing? So if I go to my tenant administration level, and if I go to tenant management, this is the setting which will now be default, right? And so historically you'd had to opt in to get Hop. Now it's out of the box. So essentially that means that every time I create a Autopatch policy, right, and if the device meets the criteria, then it will automatically enable Hotpatch for those set of devices, right? Which is good. Obviously, you still have the requirement. We need to have minimum 24H2. and we need to have the virtualization-based security, which we'll go in and check in a minute. So as long as you meet those requirements, as long as you have this Autopatch group set up, and as long as on the Autopatch group you have Hotpatch enabled, then we should be good to go. We can now get security updates without having to bother the user. Now, as I mentioned before, this is not a reason to leave VMs up and running for 2-3 months at a time without needing to reboot, because that would just kill the performance. But for me, this is fixing the problem where a user deferring, and then we can then go and install the update without having to bother the user and have to reboot and lose important client work as well. So to me, this is the problem that this is fixing. That's how to configure it and enable it. So what we'll do now is we'll go and actually check on our device to see is it compatible and how we can check that. All right, the next thing we'll need to do is to make sure that we're using virtualization-based security, because this is a requirement for Hotpatch. So we'll go and do that now. So I'm going to head over to my Windows 365 desktop, which I've got here. So what we need to do is just go in. The easiest way to do it is just do msinfo32, okay, and look at the system information. Now, if you've got the virtualization-based security running, you'll see here it says virtualization-based security running. Right, we can see there we've got a credential guard and hypervisor-based enforced coding integrity. So that means we're okay, we're good. Now this is just a default Windows 365 desktop, so this to me means that this is enabled by default. We don't need to do anything. I presume the same is going to be for Azure Virtual Desktop single session, but if you do need to enable it, you can configure it via Intune. And then just push out a setting to all those devices. But this is one of the prerequisites. So if you've not got a certain VM spec which doesn't support virtualization-based security, then you're not going to be able to use Hotpatch. That probably becomes applicable if it has a virtual desktop single session desktops, because only certain VM SKUs will have that capability of running that. So that's just something to be wary of. But for Windows 365, it's disabled out the box. The one thing to be wary of when we're talking about Hotpatch as well is the release cycles, right? And the reason why it said you only have to reboot every 3 months is because every cumulative update, you do have to reboot, have to force a reboot. Okay, so let me just quickly explain what I mean by this. We have something called these release cycles, right? So every quarter, Microsoft will release a cumulative update, and that includes all the baseline updates. And then every update in between that will just have all the security updates. Okay, so what this Hotpatch feature is you still have to do a reboot on the cumulative updates because they contain actual features as well. But any update in between that for the next 3 months can only include security updates. So that's why we had to enable the quality updates, if that makes sense. So what this feature is basically saying is, right, okay, every 3 months I want to do a big update and I'll reboot for that. But in between that time period, if I'm working away on my machine and there's a security update that's pushed out, it's not going to affect me. It's not going to make me reboot. So this is what this setting is. So it just makes the whole patching process a lot easier. And for you, the admin, it means that maybe you can be compliant a lot quicker because you can push those updates out and you don't have to wait until those machines will be rebooted, because sometimes people defer it for like days or weeks. So we don't have to do that anymore. So that's the major problem that this thing is fixing. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there just to let you know that this is not a, hey, I can leave my machine running for a year. Every cumulative update, we will have to reboot the workstation. So that would be like every 3 months. But in between that, we don't have to reboot if we don't want to. I would definitely still recommend rebooting at least once a day, maybe a minimum once a week, but you have the option to keep on running if you need to. So what I'll do now is I'll show you how to actually create this via Windows 365 provision policy. Right, so obviously what I've just done, I've manually gone in there and added groups and stuff, which you absolutely can do. But you can also configure this as part of the provision policy, so the machines automatically get added to the Autopatch group as well. Right, so let's see how that works. So I'm in the portal, so I'm going to go and create a new provisioning policy. Okay, so if I go to provisioning policies and I go to create policy, I'm going to call this Autopatch as an example. Autopatch, access a full cloud PC, hybrid desktop join, yeah, okay, geography, go to Europe, I use single sign-on, we're good there. Select the gallery image, so we're good there. So you can see here under additional services, what I've actually got is Autopatch. So if I select that, what that's then going to do is it's going to enable me to select that existing Autopatch group that I've got. Okay, so if I go through and just create that provision policy, what that will essentially mean is that every time I create a new Windows 365 desktop from that provision policy, is automatically going to add it into the auto patch group for me, which basically means I don't need to worry about the patching, right? Because all those update rings, all that information, it's all going to get managed by Microsoft, right? So it's nothing for me to worry about. I don't need to worry about which update ring it's in or anything like that. Microsoft will just automatically take care of that stuff for me. So again, making things simpler. That's one less thing that you now have to worry about. All right. That's Autopatch and Hotpatch explained for Windows 365 and Azure Virtual Desktops. Definitely see the benefits of this feature. You get it as part of your licensing anyway, so definitely would recommend enabling it because it means that you don't have to manage those update rings anymore, right? Microsoft manage all this for you. And the fact that users don't have to reboot to apply security updates basically just means that you can deploy updates quicker, right, without having to interrupt the user. I can definitely see that benefit from the admin perspective, but also from the user experience perspective as well. It's a shame it only supports Azure Virtual Desktop single session and Windows 365 single session as well. And because for me, the real good use case this is around Azure Virtual Desktop multi-session. Because managing patching in a multi-session environment is very difficult because some host pools are run 24/7 and you have a problem rebooting session host and trying to find the right time to do that, where you have to put hosts into dry mode and that kind of thing. So the fact that this doesn't support multi-session is one of the biggest drawbacks for me. But if I'm managing single session desktops, as in within Windows 365 or within Azure Virtual Desktop, then it's definitely something I could see myself enabling if I was managing an environment. So it's something that I definitely recommend that you enable because you've got access to license anyway, and it just makes your life a lot easier. Yeah, that's it from the video for me this week. I hope you found it useful. If you did, please click that like and subscribe button, and I'll see you next week for another one. Thank you. Bye bye.